Warning.
This show contains mature content. Listener discretion is advised.
Are you ready to get your mind blown?
One angry New York City Puerto Rican decided to start a radio show. Determined to piss the world off by shoving a mirror in front of society's face, he kicked them in the balls.
What are you? Who are you?
This is the Crotch Shot Radio Show. Crotch Shot Radio Show.
This is not a test. This is a broadcast transmission.
We're going to stay on the air.
And now, the Whippy.
Welcome to the Crowd Shot Radio Show, where we kick the issues in the balls. We are on an active war against bullshit. We would do anything and everything to expose bullshit. The ends justify the means. Today won't be any different. Today, yet is another thing that has a bug up my ass. Tonight, I'm joined by libertarian blogger Carl Rearden, and we'll be discussing the neocon infiltration of the Patriot Movement. The reason why I want to talk about this is, if you see the title of the episode, Islamophobia, Problem in the Patriot Movement. As a lot of you know, I am a 9/11 conspiracy theorist. I do not believe that we were attacked by Muslim extremists. I don't believe in hating people based on their religion. Especially, I'm not afraid of Muslims. That's it. I'm not Islamophobic. I just simply do not believe in extremist Muslims. I believe that ISIS and Al Qaeda before it were just tools of the CIA to continue a war in the Middle East. But without further ado, I would like to introduce Senor Kyle Rearden. How you doing, Kyle?
I'm doing pretty well, Louis. Laissez-faire. Been a long-time listener, first-time guest, so I'm pretty excited.
I think you've called in before. I mean,
or maybe I did once before, perhaps.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
So you are an anti-political libertarian blogger.
Yep.
What's your blog? Go ahead.
Oh, it's located, courtesy of FPRN, it's located at The Last Bastille. Bastille is spelled Bastille, thelastbastille.com. I try to focus on various topics, dealing with legal matters, economic matters, even dealing with self-defense issues and such, use of force issues. And the reason, I guess, why I would be labeled anti-political is because I do not believe in working inside the system, in reformism, in begging those who falsely imagine themselves to be our rulers for special favors or anything else. I think that if we're going to be advocates of liberty, we have to take direct action and implement it in our own lives without asking permission from the state. So that's kind of the short version. So whenever I do anything, like I tell people, hey, guess what? You can cancel your voter registration because the government laws say that you can. Many of them do. And when I also mention things like the Freedom Umbrella, which is a list of all of the direct action methods, and there's over 90 of them, that is currently available. Actually, the Freedom Umbrella is actually on another website called Liberty Under Attack, libertybunderattack.com.
Yes, I've had oh God, I forgot his name already.
Oh, you mean Shane?
Yes, I've had young Shane on the show.
Yeah.
I should try to get him on. That would be fantastic.
Well, he just published the second edition of the Freedom Umbrella, and there's like over 90 different options for direct action and so forth. So, so there's some things I'm involved in ideas and concepts and methods, techniques for actually securing our liberty that I've been involved in. And for your listeners, one thing that I would like to point out is I was part of the larger effort to put what I think, hopefully, is the final nail in the coffin of Luke Rudkowski's embezzlement nonsense from years ago that I know that you've been very much on the forefront of as well. So I kind of had my toe in a lot of different things. I'll just put that in short.
Yeah, so what is that? I mean, why bring that up in this case?
Well, it's rather interesting because Luke Rudkowski was very much involved in the Patriot Movement, I think is fair to say. The idea of returning to limited government, the idea of restoring the Republic, of upholding the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights and so forth. So I guess that's the loose connection, I guess to some degree, but the only reasoning I'm mentioning it now is just for your listeners in terms of my background and all that. So, you and I have known each other for at least couple years now, at the very least. So
about 30.
I just try to kind of help behind the scenes as much as I can. But every once in a while, I'll pop my head up and get on radio and broadcast with good folks like you and Shane and some other people, and speak truth to power. So that's pretty much what we're doing here tonight.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it just seems like I always find myself in situations where I know, okay, I'm going against the grain. It's like, yeah, this makes sense. This is like when it came to the Luke thing. I made myself a damn near pariah in the 9/11 Truth Movement until it became cool to question Alex Jones and get mad at Alex Jones. And then it's like, oh yeah, Luke is scum. I knew that all the time. Fuck Louis. Like, okay. So now this is just another thing. Is like, okay, you idiots. First it's like, okay, yeah, 9/11 is an inside job, criminal elements within our government. It's like, oh yeah, Muslims are a threat. They're using Muslims to destabilize. Like, shut the fuck up, Alex. Kyle?
Well, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm here. Yeah, it's kind of reminds me a bit of that like Mark Twain quote about what a patriot is.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit like that, it's just kind of a bunch of these Johnny-come-latelys. And it's like, well, geez, guys, if you had these serious moral qualms beforehand, why didn't you speak up earlier? Like, I mean, if you seriously thought that there was stuff going on, why not earlier? Yeah. And, perhaps regarding the issue we're going to discuss tonight, maybe I should have spoken up earlier. And I'll be frank, ladies and gentlemen, I've got a lot to lose.
I thought you're Kyle.
I'm sorry?
I thought you were Kyle. Who's Frank? That old joke.
I totally missed it. Thanks for pointing that out. But yeah, I've got a lot to lose. Mm-hmm. A lot of my associates are minarchists. They believe in the concept of limited government and so forth. Mm-hmm. And it's only up until recently I've been associating with more purely libertarian folks who are kind of pushing more towards the no government position. So, but I still keep in contact with folks who still want limited government to some degree. And unfortunately, many of them, they're not so much promoting limited government anymore. They're not so much promoting restoring the Republic or rescuing the Constitution or anything like that. They're pretty much, a lot of our conversations now, private conversations, revolving around the Muslim question. So it was pretty much an issue of, well, how am I going to deal with this? And, my most recent article doesn't even have anything to do with this. It was an article about Social Security. So I'm working on other things. I'm plodding along and getting my work done as a blogger. And unfortunately, whenever I have private conversations with people and I'm taking a break between articles or during the research phase for an article and the actual writing phase, I have to hear about this shit regarding the Muslim question and so forth. So it was kind of a ticking time bomb, Louis. in terms of having to address it. And you know what? I might get ostracized because of what I'm about to say tonight. So I just want to make that perfectly clear right from the outset. That is a risk I'm taking, and I'm willing to do it.
I mean, look, not to downplay what you're trying to do. But with people that don't matter, like usually, like these people, do they clothe you? Do they feed you? Do they give you money to pay your bills?
Maybe not exactly to that degree, but they have helped me with writing articles on various things, with getting government documents, with all sorts of things. So no, to that degree, no, they're not like family in that sense, but they are, I guess you could say, ranging from acquaintances to even close friends.
Yeah.
So
and if they're really good people, they would understand. Maybe they might be in the wrong and that you're just trying to bring them back.
Well,
or trying to help.
What I'm interested in at this point is, can we even have a dialogue about the issue where we can present both sides, not just, the John Ritzheimer version of it. And don't worry, I'll get to him and his shenanigans, because he's one hell of a character, I'll say that much, with his Fuck Islam t-shirts.
Right.
I'll get to that in a bit. But what I'm interested in, just from the outset, just the audience understands where I'm coming from, I want both sides of the issue. Hell, I would love nothing more than a moderated debate with rules where each side can, we can discuss it and so forth. But obviously that's not what we're doing tonight. We are presenting, unfortunately, just one side of the issue. The other side of the issue that is taking more of a critical eye to this recent, what's really a fad, whether it's pushed by really these neoconservatives like Pamela Geller, Bridget Gabrielle, even Ann Barnhart from years ago. And then you have other folks like John Ritzheimer taking up the banner and doing things like putting a bullet round through copies of the Quran. That's where it's gone. And so I think, well, let's take a history lesson and kind of go back a little bit and really see, is this kind of rhetoric, is it even true? I think would be one thing to answer, but is it even justified and so forth? Now, truth be told, Louis, I remember, and I think you probably remember this too, I remember when the Patriot Movement used to be cool, like during the Clinton and Bush Jr. years. So like the 1990s throughout the 2000s, I think would pretty much be safe to say. So pre-Obama, if you will. I remember guys like Alex Jones, 2004 Republican National Convention. I think that year it was in New York City.
Yeah, it
when
was.
the police state guys rolled out.
Yeah.
And Pier, I think it was Pier 57, I think it was turned into a temporary concentration camp.
It was, in fact, they were, I remember they're still, I think they're still settling out of court with some of those people that were locked up because that had asbestos.
Yeah, there was a lot of health problems with that, wasn't there?
Yeah. I mean, there were people that got. Well, no, that was a separate issue. Forget it. I was talking about people. But that was critical mass. Was critical mass? Was that critical mass? Hold on, I gotta keep talking.
No, well, remember, critical mass, those are the guys riding on bicycles, but that's something a little bit different. But, I remember when the Patriot Movement used to be cool. I remember a lot of the guys who were doing like a lot of the militia training exercises and such. I remember the Hatari. I remember a lot of very different people.
It was during the Republican National Convention back in August 27th, 2004. They during the RNC here in New York City, they mass arrest a lot of the critical mass bicyclists, even took away their bikes, and a lot of those people had settled out of court because their property was stolen.
I'm not surprised by that. I mean, there was a lot of police state actions during that particular RNC and so forth. But, I remember the Patriot Movement. I remember guys like Michael Badnarik, screaming bloody murder about the government, disregarding the Constitution, the federal one anyway, 1787. I remember a lot of the leftists, for lack of a better term, progressive socialists and so forth. I remember a lot of them being anti-war, which they're not so much anymore, of course, because Obama and the White House, right? Their guy got in, as it were, as they would view it in terms of the left-right paradigm. See, I remember all of that. I think you remember a lot of that too. So 1990s, 2000s was a very different time period. in terms of people who were, yes, they were nationalistic. That's true. That's never changed. And that is part of what we're discussing tonight. So, yes, they were nationalistic, but at least they gave a damn about liberty, at least to some degree, and at least they were using the Bill of Rights, the Federal Bill of Rights, as a template for what should be an idea of our freedoms: free speech, religious liberty. We'll get to that tonight as well. Religious liberty, keeping and bearing arms, a lot of things related to privacy, and many other things. I remember a lot of that. And, something else I think deserves mentioning. I know you kind of mentioned a little bit ago that you're a truther and still are. I've known a lot of, guys like yourself and others who kind of hold to that position about 9/11 being a false flag or inside job. Now, me personally, I just respectfully disagree about that issue. I'm more of like the Ron Paul, more a blowback type thing. So you and I would be similar in the sense of because of the federal government's actions, there's and especially the unconstitutional wars abroad and all that. That's why you have these suspiciously violent events and so forth. So that is pretty much the common ground. But I don't even think what we're discussing tonight regarding the neocon infiltration of the Patriot Movement, I don't even think it really has anything to do with 9/11 so much. I mean, I guess you could go on that angle if you really want to, but I just don't personally see it. I mean, I remember back in 2002. Do you remember 2002? Right after 9/11, but before Iraq got invaded?
Maybe.
Basically the Patriot Act was still pretty brand new for the most part.
Yeah.
I remember, and this was back when I'll admit it tonight, I used to be a news junkie. Thankfully, I'm not so much anymore. I actually try to stick to like books and things. But back when I was a news junkie in 2002, I remember reading a ton of reports back then over the news wires like Reuters and AP and such that the screeners, that TSA, remember TSA, Transportation Security Administration? They were brand new too because they had just started the year before.
Yeah, I actually remember trying to get a job with TSA, and I was told that I had too much education, and at the time I just had a high school diploma.
God, I could believe that. But I remember reading reports of TSA unjustly profiling Americans who were of Arabic ancestry as if they were terrorists, because people were still afraid about the so-called Islamic terrorism, the so-called war on terror, which in subsequent years has proven to be a hoax, as I'm sure your listeners are familiar with. But I remember all of that. Now, there's another detail a lot of people don't really remember, which I do, and I even mentioned in one of my articles. I think I gave you a link to it earlier. I remember that there were anyone who was of Arabic ancestry who was not a Muslim, people who were just secular. I remember all sorts of other people from the Middle East, not Muslims, people who were Hindus. My personal favorite were the Coptic Christians getting harassed by TSA circa 2002 and treated as if they were Islamic terrorists. And thankfully, a lot of that has died down in the subsequent decade and change, although it still happens every now and again, so I'm not saying it doesn't happen. But, they've had to be a little bit more careful because people at the time, back then, raised a hue and a cry, and rightfully so. It was unjust profiling of people because of their ancestry.
Actually, if I could make a little comment about that, there was this there's this show called Adam Ruins Everything, and he did this thing about security, and they made the point that the TSA has never stopped a terrorist.
Yeah, that's true.
And I would argue because there's no such thing. You can't stop the government. If the government wants to blow something up, they're gonna blow something up, and they'll just tell the TSA agents to stand down. But all the body scanning, all the X-ray machines X-raying your bags, it's all something called security theater.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, and as someone that does security, checking in people at a front desk, taking their ID, is not going to stop a mass shooter.
No kidding.
It's not. I mean, it's good. It makes it look like you're securing something, but it really isn't. The best way to secure something is with a locked door.
Well, that's definitely one way of doing it in terms of barricades and such.
Yeah.
But in terms of the history that I think a lot of the Patriots have forgotten, which is something that I would like to mention tonight as well, is if you go back to like the 1980s, a lot of people have forgotten about Operation Cyclone and the Mujahideen. The federal government during the Cold War, as a way of waging proxy wars against the Soviet Union. Remember the Soviet Union, what the Russians used to be called when they were officially communists?
Mm-hmm.
As
opposed to being unofficially communist?
Basically, yes, because remember the Chinese they're still officially communist, even though they're technically fascist, but that's a whole other discussion for another time.
Yeah.
In terms of geopolitics. The Mujahideen were equipped, financed, and trained by the CIA.
Yes.
That was the whole point of Operation Cyclone. Okay, so the federal government has a history of equipping, training, and funding, these freedom fighters in Afghanistan, basically to push back the Soviets. And then, of course, once the Soviets leave, the Mujahideen split in 20,000 different directions. Some of them formed the Taliban. Some of them just went off and just did other things. Some of them went back to their homes, kind of like in the tradition of Cincinnatus. You go wage the war, you win your freedom, and then you go back to your farms and you live your life. You have a family and so forth, which is kind of like what normal people do, or a lot of normal people, or they go travel the world, or they get on with the business of life, as Thomas Jefferson would put it. But then, funny thing happens, a couple decades later, basically you fast forward about 2001 or so, next thing you know, the federal government's, invading Afghanistan because of 9/11. Well, isn't that rather interesting?
Yeah.
Because a lot of, those who were the friends of the federal government are now the enemies. Wow, that's rather interesting. I wonder what led to that. So once you have Operation Cyclone and the Mujahideen, you fast forward a couple decades later, and especially following the invasion of Iraq in 2003, you have all of these insurgencies. I'm sure you remember this rhetoric from last decade or so, where it's the Iraqi insurgency, and then there's all these other insurgents coming from other countries in the Arabic world, the Middle East.
Yeah.
Whereas
the joke was, you mean people trying to get your asses out of their own country?
Yeah. And it's just kind of silly. And then eventually they were called.
Yeah, it's like that old joke. It's like if the Chinese were to invade us, we would be considered insurgents,
right?
Yeah, it's like
remember there was the one Ron Paul ad that was where the press release or whatever it was, where he was suggesting that what if Texas got invaded, and I am a Texan, so I can relate to it. If Texas got invaded by the Chi-Coms, wouldn't the Texans, who would be using their ARs and AKs and whatever else to fend off the Chinese invaders, wouldn't they be called insurgents by the Chinese communists? I assume they would be.
And honestly, not to poke holes in that whole theory, how the fuck would the Chinese be able to safely land on Texas?
Good luck. I can't figure it out.
I get like somebody will call them like, look, stupid, this is how you do it. You go through Mexico. Like, wouldn't the Mexicans have something to say about, Chinese marching through their land?
Unless they got bought and paid off for it. But again, that's a hypothetical. What actually happened real world, of course, is what happened in Iraq. And so because of Al-Qaeda allegedly doing 9/11, which is kind of like, and best case scenario, it was blowback. So the federal government's still not innocent. Anyway, so you have Al-Qaeda. And then with the insurgencies, you then have Al-Qaeda in Iraq, so-called, which is somehow mystically different from the other Al-Qaeda, inexplicably so. And then basically you fast forward to roughly about 3 or so years ago, basically 2011. And then you have the so-called Al-Qaeda in Syria. And then not too long ago, maybe about, last year probably, you have freaking ISIS. Now, what's interesting is that ISIS is the Al-Qaeda in Syria. Again, it's basically like the same type. You know, like how in a martial arts discipline you can trace the lineage from like sensei to apprentice.
Yeah.
And you can trace it. Exact same thing. You go from the Mujahideen to Al Qaeda in Iraq, to Al Qaeda in Syria, to the so-called moderate Syrian rebels, who are not so moderate, of course, as those in the American intelligence community know. And then, of course, that leads to ISIS or ISIL or whatever their acronym happens to be this week. The guy's doing the beheadings, basically. And what's rather interesting is, remember Hillary Clinton and Benghazi scandal with the emails and so forth? Well, the reason that all of that is important is because that is the hardcore proof that the federal government was, once again, doing what? Equipping, funding, and training ISIS.
Yeah. So what do you think of that movie coming out, 13 Hours?
Oh, dude, man, I don't watch that kind of stuff anymore. There's no sense in doing it. I'm too busy doing research.
In fact, hold on, let me see if I could play the trailer. 13 Hours in Benghazi. Actually, when I was I went to the movies to see the last Hunger Games. Don't ask me why. They played the trailer to this, and I was like, well, I guess that's why Hillary's not getting elected.
Yeah, they wouldn't want her to be President Snow, right?
Yeah, like that's why she's not getting elected. That's why her ass ain't. And people got pissed. So here, let me play this. This is 13 Hours, the Secret Soldiers of Benghazi official trailer. In 2012, the threat level in Benghazi, Libya, was deemed critical.
Libyan visa. Official.
Pull over for inspection.
Sorry, sir, I can't do that.
Pull over for inspection!
How willing are you to die for your country? I'm ready to go right here, right now.
Everybody, this is Jack Silva. Jack. We train SEALs at Coronado, so he knows the drill.
Welcome to Club Med.
People running around with guns.
We need immediate assistance. We are overrun.
State's under attack. Let's go, man. State's under attack. Let's go. We gotta move.
If you do not get here soon, we are all gonna die.
You have a U.S. ambassador at risk.
The ambassador is in his safe haven. You're not the first responders. You're the last resort. You will wait.
None of you have to go. But we are the only help they have.
From director Michael Bay, because of course, you if you're gonna make Hillary look bad, you need to have more explosions than actually happened. When everything went wrong,
Never came.
6 men had
You're
the
not taking
courage
orders anymore. You're in my world now.
to do what was right.
6 American lives to save.
This is a true story. All right. I think I made a mistake in playing that because that's really not radio friendly.
Well, I will say this. That trailer kind of reminded me of Zero Dark 30 a little bit. You know, this is the problem, is that the military-industrial complex has to use the power of Hollywood to push their narratives. And so I'm not surprised at all that, that they'll basically try to dramatize whatever and whatnot. But as far as like real life goes, the only reason I brought up Benghazi was to basically show that the reason Hillary Clinton is trying, and remember the last or the second to last so-called Democratic presidential debate when Bernie Sanders was said, said about we're tired of hearing about Hillary Clinton's emails. We don't want to hear about it anymore. It's like, sorry, Bernie, Mr. Democratic Socialist, as he calls himself. There's actual like violations of federal law here. Like there's criminal culpability here. Besides, of course, the foreign policy implications of it and so forth. So this isn't anything to like shovel under the rug. Although Hillary does have a history, of doing that, which would be an episode all by itself.
Well, I mean, look, if I could say there is one positive note, if Hillary became president and we were in a war, I mean, there wouldn't be a quagmire under her because all the soldiers would have been killed.
Yeah, she would send them to the slaughter because she's a war hawk, right? I mean, she's very much in line with the neocon agenda that we're talking about here tonight. So what I'm trying to get at here is that, a lot of the constitutionalists during the 90s and even the 2000s, they used to be anti-war, but not so much now. And I have stuck to my guns about being anti-war, anti-government war anyway, because they're pretty much all unconstitutional. I mean, can you even list how many wars the federal government's involved in now? Hell, I try to stay on top of it, and even I can't do it. That's how bad it is. The current El Presidente got the Nobel Peace Prize, and yet he's drone bombing. He did the no-fly zone over Libya back when Gaddafi was still around, right before he got executed, if you remember that. So I mean, it's just the military-industrial complex has been very, very busy under Obama's White House, to say the least. But unfortunately, a lot of the American patriots have completely flipped, which is what we're primarily talking about tonight. And something worth mentioning, at least in passing now, but I do want to get to it a little bit later, is that I've said before that the infighting amongst patriots, constitutionalists, libertarians, and so forth, the infighting, I've said, has been the biggest problem for years. And there have been attempts to bring, for lack of a better term, there have been attempts to bring patriot unity so that people would stop bickering so that we can, get on with the business of, restoring liberty and so forth. But unfortunately, it seems to have been a curse in disguise. And I will get to that in a little bit here, why I say that. But I will say this, with the Muslim issue, the Muslim question, I will say this, I have never seen the infighting so low. And there is a reason for that, which I'll get to.
Oh, okay. What do you think is the cause of now all this Islamophobia within the Patriot Movement?
I think the federal government has noticed that people are getting pretty much fed up with their illegitimate bullcrap. And I think they're noticing that the growth, especially of people who are self-identifying as anarcho-capitalist or versions on a theme thereof, anarchist even just more generally, I think they're noticing that. There is an uptick of that. I think it is measurable. I just haven't written an article about it yet.
Yeah.
And because of that, and by the way, most of those numbers are from people who used to believe in limited government. I think the federal government's noticing this, and they're trying to sabotage it as much as they can because they know libertarians in general, whether for limited government or no government, they know libertarians are staunchly anti-war, much like I am. And they know that if they can push the nationalism button, they can balkanize the patriots against libertarians, and that's what I honestly think is happening here. And I would like to get into, I think, how that happened, but I think that's kind of the end goal here, is to prevent a unified resistance of sorts against the federal government specifically. And so now instead they try to galvanize the Patriot Movement against libertarians, against other people, so that the Patriots basically come off as a bunch of, for lack of a better term, as a bunch of nationalistic xenophobes. And it's also a discrediting mechanism because the Patriot movement didn't used to be like that. Like I said, during 90s and 2000s.
So yeah, I got Mildred in the chat room. He's like, how many shorthand terms for not war do we have now?
That's a good point.
And also, I have a gentleman that he wants to call in. His name was C.W. Paul McBride. You want to take calls?
Sure, I'm open to that.
All right, so let me get him on. We got Paul. He actually made a comment. It's not Islamophobia if they're trying to kill you.
I'm here.
We got Paul. Paul, what do you want to say?
Well, I was just going to echo with what your guest said. I had a couple questions for your guest because I've been listening for about the last 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
To preference it for your listeners, and you know this, I am Eastern Orthodox, so Russian Orthodox. So I follow a lot of what goes on in Russia, Ukraine, Syria, Libya. It just surprises me, sir, that the neocons. We have to get rid of Bashar Assad. Well, what happens when Bashar Assad goes? Well, I don't know. We got to get rid of Bashar Assad. If you watch all the establishment Republicans right now, Marco Rubio, one of them, he is just screaming to high heaven, we got to get rid of Bashar Assad. Well, then ISIS takes over the Middle East and destroys Israel, which is the neocons, sacred cow. So, and Russia's a bad guy because they bombed. But I personally believe that the industrial military complex wants to bring down Russia. So therefore, the American government has nobody to say no to them. That's what this whole issue is over there right now. That's why they want to do Libya and Syria and all that. Nobody's talking about the fact that we started Libya. ISIS is there because of America. Nobody's talking about the fact that we invaded Afghanistan and Iraq when the terrorists, 9/11, or whatever you want to believe there, was from Saudi Arabia. But no, we let them go home. We let their like Trump said, we let their wives and girlfriends and all that go home. Like I said, my thing is with the whole Islamophobia, Saudi Arabia is trying to destroy the world. End of story. The main enemy here is the Saudis. And so I was just going to ask your caller, and then I'll hang up and listen. I was just going to ask your caller what his thoughts are on the Russian government, the neocons' constant obsession and fetish with Vladimir Putin and the Russian government, and how that plays in with their narrative. And I'll hang up now.
Alrighty, Kyle?
Yeah, sure. I'm no fan of the Russian government. Putin can go, stick it where the sun doesn't shine. I'm not a fan of the Russians. I'm not a fan of the Chinese. I'm also not a fan of the Israelis, and I'm certainly no fan of the Saudi Arabians.
So okay. Let me, before you continue your other points, why why don't you feel that Putin isn't a hero like almost a lot of these patriots are painting him out to be?
Because of what happened with the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians, if they want to secede and have their own country, they should be able to do so. But that's not what happened, is it?
No.
Here's the problem. As a libertarian, I really have a problem with the entire concept of authority. So people who falsely proclaim themselves to be your rulers, my rulers, the rulers of the guy down the street, even the rulers of the fellow who just called in a moment ago, I kind of have a problem with that conceptually just at all. So whether you were talking about those who imagine themselves the rulers of the United States, the rulers of Europe in general, the European Union, right? It's a superstate. The rulers of Russia, the rulers of China, the rulers of Saudi Arabia, the rulers of friggin' South Africa, or any other place on the planet for that matter, except perhaps Antarctica, because I don't think there's a sovereign nation state there, at least not yet, unless they terraform it, right? I really don't like the concept of people basically claiming that I have to obey their laws because they said so. This monopoly statutory law thing, which of course is a discussion for another time. So I hope that answers your caller's question. I don't side with foreign rulers because mainly I have a problem with the domestic rulers as it is, and I don't want to compound the situation. I don't agree with basically the emergence of what is really kind of neo-feudal Russia. So look, if the Ukrainians want to go off and they don't want to be part of the Russian Federation or whatever the hell they call themselves this week, they should be free to do so. So I hope that answers his question.
Mm-hmm. So do you believe that Putin is fighting against the New World Order?
Whether he is or not, I don't particularly care. If he is, then whatever. I mean, the allies of today could be the enemies of tomorrow. But the problem is that he still imagines himself to be the ruler of Russia, and that I have a problem with. The Russian people should be free to exercise their natural liberty without asking permission from the government, which, by the way, is pretty much my same way of viewing the United States federal government, tier 2. So, is Putin a hero? According to what standard? Does the Russian government still tax its people? Does it still expect their people to follow all sorts of, to obey the dictates of people who would try to say that vices are crimes? Look how they treat homosexuals, for Christ's sakes. I mean, this isn't, hard to figure out. So, no, I don't support Putin. I don't support any of these self-imagined rulers, and especially not the ones on the North American continent. I hope that answers your caller's question.
There you go. So, all right, so let's get back on topic here. So the background here, the Patriot Movement used to be cool under Clinton and Bush. Yes, you were talking about the 9/11 false flag inside job versus blowback.
I think the last thing I mentioned was the infighting. So just to mention that briefly, just one more time before because we need to get to the meat and potatoes here.
Yeah.
The infighting has really gone down, but the reason I say it's a curse in disguise is because of what caused the recent Patriot unity that's been sought after all these years, and it has to deal directly with what we're about to get into. So there's a lot of different ways you could describe what this these anti-Muslim diatribes, for lack of a better term, really kind of involve. And I guess the most neutral way of trying to describe it would really be kind of the Muslim question. So kind of like during World War II, the Nazis would phrase it as the Jewish question. Or Murray Rothbard, speaking to libertarians, he would say the question of the state, whether to have a government at all or not. Because, of course, when he did it, I was more tongue-in-cheek. But regarding with tonight's subject, I guess you could call it the Muslim question. And the Muslim question is simply this. Are Muslims a threat to American liberty? How you answer that question is rather important.
Yeah. I mean, why?
Well, I guess that's the question that has been proffered by a lot of these folks going on their anti-Islamic diatribes, because the way they answer that question, for them, they answer the question by saying, yes, Muslims are a threat to American liberty. And then there are those of us who say, no, Muslims are not a threat to American liberty. So the question that all of this is pivoting on is, are Muslims a threat to American liberty? I think that's the most concise way of trying to show both sides of it. And obviously, I'll be presenting the one side of it, obviously, that no, Muslims are not a threat to American liberty. But I do think it's important to look at what the neocons have been saying.
Look, I haven't looked in much into this, but my common sense says, Habib that sells me my hello in the cart of the block from me is no threat to me.
Well, sure. I mean, if you're going by common sense or whatever else, sure. But remember,
okay, at the Muslim family that lives 3 doors down from me that walks around in a hijab is not a fucking threat. Just because you're a Muslim doesn't mean it doesn't mean jack shit.
Well, according to the Patriots now, it does.
It makes no damn sense. It's then
to them it does make sense, very much so. They keep
they're fucking idiots. This is my common sense. It's I don't see them as a threat. Honestly, it's kind of hard to see anybody as a threat until they're a threat. But if they're not making any noise, any saying, "Oh, that door America" and shit like that, for me to be "Oh my God," they're praying to Mecca or some shit. Who gives a flying fuck?
Well, sure, and for example, if a Muslim does raise his scimitar and is trying to slice you or something, then it's kind of obvious, right? It becomes an issue of self-defense at that point. But we're not talking about that tonight. We're not talking about individual criminals.
Yeah.
The issue here is unfortunately it is a collective one, which in terms of collective trends, that kind of gets difficult, at least to some degree. But how you answer that question, are Muslims a threat to American liberty, is very, very important. Now you were mentioning about how it makes no goddamn sense and all that.
Yeah, but then if you start if you start asking that, then you could say, okay, so if just because they happen to worship, okay, so are Mormons a threat to national security are fucking Scientologists are. Yeah, sorry. Scientologists is the one religion that is a threat to national security. So I'm just gonna throw this out there. Fuck you, not Gene Roddenberry. What's his name? R something. I forgot.
Oh wait, you mean Tom Cruise, the other celebrity?
No, the one that founded Scientology.
Oh, L. Ron Hubbard.
L. Ron Hubbard. There you go. Fuck you. Well, he's dead, so he doesn't exist anymore. Anyways, Mildred's like, I wonder if some of those patriots want a mythical enemy like ages past. People fear uncertainty.
Well, I think that is well founded. I will say this. Mm-hmm. Having the patriots basically kind of talk to me in private conversations and go at length about things. I've had to hear it kind of, and all that. Otherwise I, don't stay in contact with them. And, I do want to stay in contact with many of them because they do useful things for me and are useful for other reasons and so forth. But I've had to get an education of sorts, or maybe would it be disinformation? I don't know. But I think it's worth mentioning. So there's a couple different things here that I think need to be considered when we're trying to evaluate how do you even begin answering that question. So let's look at the one side of it. So there have been different people writing articles regarding the Muslim question. Let's see. Gary Hunt wrote an article not this past October, but October before last in 2014, where it was. I'm trying to pull it up. Hold on a second. It was a conference held by Sunni Muslims in Scandinavia in May of 2013. Is what he's reporting on. And it was the issue of one of the speakers, name was Faha Ullah Quasheri. And basically the idea of the transcript basically kind of was that, that the people in attendance at the conference were normal Sunni Muslims. What's his name? Quasheri basically asked, how many of you agree that men and women should sit separately? Please raise your hands. And like everyone in the room raises their hands except a few people. He went on to say, how many of you believe in stoning for adultery and other things? And like most people raised their hands and so forth. Now, keep in mind, this is something that took place in Scandinavia. Now, I ask you, why would the American patriots, American patriots, remember they're supposed to be nationalistic, why would American patriots give one twit about something happening in Scandinavia? I'm just saying, if the question is dealing with Muslims being a threat to American liberty, why do Muslims on the other side of the pond have to do with anything?
Yeah.
So that is another aspect that needs to be dealt with here. Is what is the scope of evidence? That's another question. What is the scope of evidence in determining how you go about answering the Muslim question? Are we looking at Muslims globally? Are we looking at Muslims in the industrialized Western nations like the UK, US, Australia, and so forth? But are we only looking at the Muslims in America? What's the scope here?
But also, what makes them a threat? Is it simply the fact that they worship Allah? Like what makes a person a threat? Like under what are the parameters?
Well, remember there are violently suspicious events that occur, but then for some reason, whether for good or bad reasons, they are attributed to Muslims. So, for example, if you remember the shootings in Garland, actually it was right here in Texas in Garland. Mm-hmm. Pamela Geller's free speech drawing Muhammad contest event thing. And I'll get to her in a bit. But there was the shooting. And as a response to that, John Ritzheimer became very big in the Patriot Movement because of the protest he led at that mosque in Arizona. Which is like, well, wait a minute, I thought the shooting happened in Texas. Well, yes, it did, but supposedly they were members of some sort of mosque in Arizona. You see the problem. So, unless he's saying that they went and traveled or something, I'm not sure if that's part of the narrative that Ritzheimer is saying, because he's kind of, his narrative seems kind of disjointed, cherry-picked, and heavy-handed at times. But that's something to kind of consider. This is the same guy who wears the Fuck Islam shirt. Okay, John Ritzheimer, former U.S. Marine. He was even on the Pete Santilli show not 2 months ago. Remember Pete Santilli, Mr. I want to restore the Republic, limited government, U.S. Constitution,
Yeah.
Oath Keepers, and all of that? Well, he had Ritzheimer on, Mr. Fuck Islam. So, like, what's Pete Santilli's deal? I mean, Pete Santilli didn't take him to task about any of this. He was saying, yeah, the Muslims are a threat, more or less. So, I mean, people can come to their own conclusions about Mr. Santilli for other reasons, but I will say is that Pete Santilli did not challenge Ritzheimer on you just took it for granted that the Muslims were a threat. So where did these how did this come about with just taking it for granted that Muslims in America are like bad people, just period? Where did this come from?
I mean, if I can make the point, when the supposed ISIS leader Ayyad al-Baghdadi, he's a Baghdadi. So, anyways, he like I just remember when you were talking about this, because I mean the question is, just like, let's say, okay, that shooting that happened, it was done by a Muslim member of this specific mosque, but does that mean they were what if all of them weren't in on it? It was just this one nutcase, and it wasn't because he was Muslim.